I started off as a film journalist, technically at university. I worked as the film editor and the film reviewer for a student magazine. So I was already, actually before that I did the odd review for a school newspaper as well. I remember reviewing Natural Born Killers and Train Spotting, which both came out around the time I was doing my A-levels. And it wasn't that the school newspaper had a film column, but there was an opportunity to write opinion on whatever you wanted, and both those films seemed to me interesting films at the time to get your teeth into, probably more in a kind of op-ed way, in the sense that people were talking about them. And I think I was excited by the fact that cinema was being discussed and written about beyond just the territory of reviewing. After university, I worked as a more general magazine arts journalist, editor at Dazed and Confused magazine for a few years. I wrote about film alongside other subjects, but I spent a lot of time freelancing as a film journalist as well for newspapers such as The Guardian, The Observer, magazines like Sight and Sound, and then I took on a full-time staff job as film editor at Time Out in 2004, and I've been working in various permutations of that job ever since.
Okay, thank you very much. And although I'm going to ask you some questions about what film criticism is, let's start with what it isn't. Are there any kind of pernicious misconceptions that the public has about what we do that you'd like to challenge here and now?
Pernicious misconceptions about what critics do or what critics go through. I'm always asked, are you bribed, or do people offer you money to write certain things about film? That doesn't happen. I mean, I think bribery, if you could call it that, and I use that word loosely, happens in a sort of a much looser, indirect sense, I think, in the kind of film industry media nexus, i.e. giving you a glass of wine at a screening. So that's one thing that I'm asked, and I don't mean that giving me a glass of wine at a screening means that I say something one way or another about a film. Pernicious misconceptions about film criticism. For me, it's that I spend all my days in a darkened room, 5, 6, 7 days a week. I'm a writer, I'm an editor. I see myself as someone who works in publishing as well as someone who writes, as well as a writer who writes about film. I can be, I'd say luckily, quite selective about what I see. I probably see, it's impossible to work out, but I'm not seeing every film that comes out every week. So I'm in the cinema regularly. I'm in the cinema every week a few times, but I'm not in it all week, every day, all week. Other pernicious misconceptions about what film criticism? I can't think of anything else.
No,
top of my head.
Thank you. Yeah. And, so what do you think film criticism is? Like, what's it for? What are its values? Why do we do it?
I think film criticism exists for all sorts of reasons. And for me, as a journalist, it begins with the audience. It begins with what that audience is expecting from you and is expecting from that publication. So film criticism can be a purely consumer pursuit, in the sense that it's helping people to make a choice about what to see at the cinema that weekend or that week, through to serving people who just want to engage with a smart piece of writing, a smart piece of investigative, exploratory writing about a film. In many cases, I think that those two things meet in the middle. The writing about film as a search for some truth about the film, coupled with writing about film as a way of helping people to choose what to see at the cinema. I think that meets in the middle in the most popular forms of journalism, certainly that we know in the UK. It meets in the middle, for example, in our broadsheet newspapers, in magazines such as Time Out, where I work.
Thank you very much. And when you've seen the film and you're approaching the writing, what are the kind of constituent parts of what you do? Like, what do you bring to bear into the film, and how do you convert it into writing?
It's a very difficult question to answer. How do you review a film? How do you critique a film? I guess, what am I trying to bring to the table when I'm writing a film? Obviously, the fact that I've seen it and I've engaged with it in a hopefully intelligent way. I'm bringing some context to the table. Hopefully, that context may be to do with what that director has done previously. That context may be to do with how that genre has been explored previously. I think it's partly it's about knowledge of the subject that you're bringing to the table as a critic. But I think partly it's about being I hesitate to use the word entertainer, but partly an entertainer as a writer. People want to knowledge is nothing. I think when people are reading film criticism, it doesn't come packaged in stylish, entertaining, accessible sometimes, or more or less accessible depending on the publication, writing. So I think I'm bringing, hopefully as a critic, and hopefully all critics are bringing to the table style as a writer and knowledge as a critic.
And how important in all of this do you think evaluation is, and more specifically, the reductive kind of evaluation that we see with ratings, with star ratings?
Are you asking what do I think of star ratings?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Ask me that.
I'll
ask you. I actually think star ratings are a very helpful way of guiding as an editor, I think star ratings are a very helpful way of guiding the reader into a review. I see a star rating and on the same lines as I see headlines, as I see stand firsts, as I see sort of introductions to all forms of journalism. If we opened up a newspaper and it didn't have and a news story didn't have a headline or didn't have a quick introduction giving you a brief summary of the news story, we'd find that a bit confusing. And I think star ratings are the way that editors and reviewers have found to convert that standard form of introduction to journalistic writing to the realm of reviewing, actually. I think there are dangers with star ratings. I've certainly heard of, and I certainly don't include myself here, I've heard of editors who issue diktats. They don't want to see usually 3-star ratings because they feel that a 3-star rating puts off a reader. This is obviously incredibly unhealthy sort of diktat, for anybody that believes in the freedom of someone to write, to say what they want to say about a film. Because for me, a star rating should purely reflect what the writing says. It should be in the way that a headline or a stand first reflects what any journalistic writing says. A star rating should reflect the writing. If there are diktats saying we don't want any 3-star reviews, that can only be translated as to we don't want reviews that sit on the fence, or reviews that issue checks and balances about the film. That's dangerous.
Abstracting away from the star ratings themselves, how important do you think evaluation in general? So what I mean by that is, like, how important is it for reviews to say whether a film is good or bad? Bearing in mind that you've already listed other constituent parts for a review, like contextualization or analysis. Where does evaluation fit in that kind of scheme?
That's a very good question. In terms of evaluation, I think as a reader, I want, if I get to the end of a review and I think I didn't know whether that person liked that film or not, I find that troubling. But then at the same time, if I get to the end of the review and I feel I've been battered by superlatives in either direction or loose adjectives thrown out all over the place that either contradict other elements of the review or back that critic into a corner where I feel I can't trust that critic, i.e. if they're telling me that something is the most something ever every week or through every review, then immediately I only have to read that critic 2 or 3 times and I lose faith. So I think evaluation is necessary in criticism, but I think it has to be incredibly measured, because a critic needs to build up. I think a critic should be thinking about their writing over a period of time, and a critic should be wanting to build up trust between the reader and them. And if their evaluation is extreme, is untrustworthy, feels tinged with hype, or feels tinged with kind of rash opinion, then I think very, very quickly that faith, or that trust between the reader and the critic disappears.
Thank you very much. That's perfect. All right, I'm getting away from sort of general questions about film criticism and getting more into sort of where we are now, what's been happening to the industry.
Yeah.
Since given that you've been in the game for a while, how's it changed? Like, what changes have you seen?
Well, I guess when I started as a professional, I loosely started writing professionally about film writing in the early 2000s. So this is obviously the dawn of the modern internet age. I remember in my first job, I had to queue up to use the one office computer that had email on it. So I was, I was there as, and the idea of a company website was a curiosity that was given to one person who wore black rimmed glasses in the corner of the office. It wasn't core to what we did in the media. So I've certainly grown up with the internet as a journalist. I'm not old enough to remember typewriters, but I'm young enough to remember when we first started to care about online publishing. What has the growth in online publishing done for film criticism? I think that's something we'd only properly be able to answer in a few years from now. I think we need some more perspective on it. Obvious things that have happened is accessibility. I mean, there's enormous access now to opinions. Enormous access to opinions that are both paid for or not paid for, professional, amateur, and also those definitions between professional and amateur have been broken down as well. I'm interested in a piece of writing if it's interesting. I don't really care if it's been paid for or not. And now, and via online hubs such as Twitter, Facebook, other online indices, I'm able to access writing from all over the place, and that's the huge change. We have so much more choice these days.
Okay, you just said that as a reader, like at the user end, it doesn't make any difference to you whether a piece of criticism is paid for or not. That all that matters is whether it's good, whether it's interesting. From your point of view as an editor, what is it that you expect from your writers as paid writers? Like, what is it that you're looking for that will make you pay a writer?
Well, as an editor, things that would make me pay a writer are, some of them are quite bland, i.e. they will deliver the copy on time. They are reliable journalists, essentially. I mean, a good critic, for me, has to be a reliable journalist. If the question is, why do I specifically want them to, why do I specifically want to pay them to write film criticism again and again? Yeah, it's a good question. It's reliability in terms of their versatility as critics, perhaps, i.e. someone who I feel can turn their hand to all sorts of genres, all sorts of films, someone who I think is going to bring knowledge to the table, someone who is easily able to enter into a certain voice that's necessary for the publication as well. It's very hard. There are many things I could say now that I think that I look for in paid critics that a blog that's not paid for will give me as well. But they're some of the positive attributes I expect from a paid critic.
Okay.
Anton, can you pull the chair a little bit towards you?
Oh yes, of course I can. Sorry, that's it. Yep. Do you think that print is here to last, or do you think that we're seeing the last days of print journalism?
It's very difficult to make declarations about the future of print because I'm going to be proved on camera or I'll be proved wrong in 15 years' time. I think print is here to last, but obviously print is enormously changing. I mean, I can make some prophecies. I think we'll probably see the death of the daily newspaper, or most daily newspapers, over a period of time. I don't think we're going to see the death of the weekend newspaper. I mean, personally, I'm just looking at my personal habits. I never ever pick up a daily newspaper. Very rarely. If I'm travelling, I may pick up a daily newspaper. I want to read a weekend newspaper. I want a Saturday paper. I want a Sunday paper. I want magazines. I want supplements. I want longer pieces of writing. I want evaluations of politics that I can catch up with on a Saturday or Sunday. I want reviews, actually. I mean, I want reviews happen to appear weekly generally because films are released weekly. I want them, and I still have a taste and a desire to read them in print. I do think print is changing. I think there is a strong future for print. Time Out actually is a good example of how you can still evolve in the digital age, and you can still evolve print by changing it. And Time Out used to be, well, it still is, in London, still is a weekly magazine, but it used to be a weekly magazine that was full of information, which you also got free online, i.e. film times or gig times. You could even get it free on Time Out's own website. And Time Out has resolved the conflict between selling the same information that you can get for free online by offering something different in print. So we offer film reviews, we don't offer film listings. Alongside film reviews, we offer interviews which people are much more likely to read in print actually than online. We offer a kind of a highlighted, curated package of inspiration across the arts in the magazine. That the website is a much more dense, bigger thing. So I think print is evolving, but it's not dying.
And do you regard, this is such a general question, but do you regard new media, by which I guess I mean not just social media, but also blogs and aggregators, like review aggregators. Are they, in general, do you think that they're a really good thing or a really bad thing, or somewhere in between for the culture of film criticism?
I don't have strong feelings for or against aggregators, but I mean aggregators to me are just indexes. I mean they're indexes of content. I mean in the same way that we've had print, analog forms of indexes, i.e. libraries. I mean, for pre the online age. I don't think. I mean, aggregators. They're also the way for the general. By general, I mean mass online audience to access writing across countries and across the world. So I find it hard to think aggregators are a terrible thing. Yes, there's something reductive about slamming a green or a red tomato on a review, but it's the same sort of reductiveness, or to one of a, to put it more positively, same sort of weigh in for the reader as star ratings are. I don't think there's anything particularly terrible about them.
Okay. And what about social media? I think that, there are very few journalists today for whom social media isn't an integral part of what they do. Mm-hmm. And do you think that that's good or bad for the kind of conversation, I guess, that we have about film today?
I think social media is good for the conversation in terms of accessing opinions and sharing opinions and discussing them in a limited way. I think social media can be dangerous for writers about film. I mean, for example, if as a film critic you're attending a film festival, you only have to walk out the door of the screening room and log on to Twitter, and there's an explosion of opinion around that film, around a film which no one, pretty much no one has seen yet. That's quite dangerous for a critic who's then about to walk into a room, review that film over the next 2 or 3 hours, and upload it to their newspaper or their magazine or their blog website, to meet the pretty tough deadlines that there are in the online world. I think it's a responsibility. I think it's the responsibility of critics to shelter themselves from the kind of storm of opinion that flies around films online. Because I think very quickly, there used to be the fear that a consensus around a film emerges physically in screening rooms, like in London, in the West End every week, when a group of 10 white male and stale critics get together to watch a film. Now I think there's a danger that same consensus can arise over social media, or a consensual division around a film, the fors and against and pros and cons, rather than getting to the complex meat of the matter. And I think it's the responsibility of writers, it's the responsibility of critics to be aware of that danger and to manage it.
And do you think now?
And I say all this as someone that uses Twitter. I like Twitter. I wish I didn't look at it so much, to be honest, but I do.
Do you think that we're all under pressure now because of the immediacy of media like Twitter to produce opinions faster than we used to?
I think there is a rush to opinion in the online age that's faster than it was in, if we can call it, the print age. Only so much though. I mean, there's always been newspapers have always wanted to be first. Newspapers have always wanted to be quick. I think that the online age has coupled with an explosion of writing around film, and so there wasn't pre the online age, there wasn't such an interest from newspapers actually to treat film as news in the way they do now. I mean, film as news now, for example, coming out of Cannes, coming out of Venice, coming out of Berlin, coming out of Toronto, is a really hot commodity in the media. So editors are expecting, editors of national newspapers or popular blogs or any sites are expecting reviews of hotly anticipated films as quickly as they possibly can get them after they've screened at a festival, after the premiere. That demand has definitely increased, and that it's down to the agility of critics to make sure that they're still holding true to strong critical values while writing quickly and while rushing to print, which we are rushing to publish.
And this is my last question, but it's but you're going to hate it because it's another crystal ball kind of.
I don't mind. Yeah.
But what do you see as the future of film criticism, and more specifically, professional film criticism, paid film criticism? I think the immediate future of film criticism is variety is the thing that comes up, and variety in the sense that critics are now and are increasingly expected not just to be critics in print, but to be critics on camera, to be critics on audio,
to be critics across different platforms. So they're, and actually, a great example in this country is Mark Commode. I mean, he would admit himself, he's not a young critic. He's not someone that's grown up through the online age. But if you look at the success of Mark Commode, he's a critic in print for the Observer, on radio for the BBC, on TV for the BBC, on a podcast as well for the BBC. He's active on Twitter. He's someone that's embraced, so it's actually more of an established critic who's embraced all platforms, and I think that is, the demand for that is only going to increase. Video reviews, I think, are going to be, and this is in the short to mid term, I think video reviews of films are going to become more and more popular very, very quickly. I was talking to a group of student critics at the Edinburgh Film Festival recently who I was mentoring. So they were all between the ages of 18 and 21, and I was asking them, who do you read? Who are the reviewers? Who are the critics you read? Most of them didn't rush to answer. Lots of them watched critics. They didn't call them critics, they just called them probably reviewers or people who talk about film on YouTube. They watched individuals who had individual channels on YouTube talking about film. I imagine that the explosion of people talking about film on YouTube channels, it'll rationalise, voices will emerge, people will be successful. Are they paid or are they sponsored? I'm not sure. I think what we imagine to be, what we consider a paid critic, if we see these YouTube stars as paid, will change. I don't think they'll be in the pay of an organisation. I think they'll be in the pay of the advertisers, which the popularity of their site can attract. But this is as far as I feel I can look into my crystal ball. But that's an area which I can see developing.
Okay. I guess we've kind of discussed a range of issues, but I'm sure there are things that we haven't touched upon that you wish to get off your chest. So really the last question is just, is there anything that we haven't approached that you'd like to discuss? Like an issue that you think just never gets discussed, or something that's dear to your heart, or a pet peeve?
No, let me think. Ask me a question. Sorry, I can't think of any. I don't have a burning. I will do later on when I'm walking down the street.
What is the thing that critics regularly do that most annoys you? What's something you see in film criticism that really, really gets your goat? Without naming names.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
Or name names if you like, but but probably not such a good idea.
No, I'm not going to. God, I'm feeling really placid today. Nothing that gets.
It's okay.
Nothing that gets my goat is rushing. So something interesting will emerge in a sec. What that gets my goat, I suppose, in terms of film critics. I think. How can I put this? A couple of things are coming to mind actually. I think one of the downsides of the online age, I think, is that critics can now broadcast their conversations with each other a lot, and I think there's a tendency for navel-gazing conversations to emerge on social media and online, which are aimed at not at a reading public, but aimed at a very, very small group of critics. And I think it's not about naming names, or I can't even think of particular examples, but I think there's a tendency towards that, a tendency to forget the general audience sometimes. I think, it's not so much a bugbear, but it's an observation. I think, especially with emerging critics or younger writers, I think we tend to forget the difference between criticism and opinion. And in journalistic sense, an op-ed piece, an opinion piece, is exploring one particular idea and reasoning that and exploring it. And for me, that's not what film criticism is. I think film criticism has to take a more balanced view of a film and decide to explore various interesting areas of that film to give a general overview of that work. I find writers who get hung up on one particular element, or who have been particularly aggrieved by one moment in a film or and then blow that out of all proportion. I think that's fine, but that's not criticism. That's opinion, and that's ranting sometimes.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I'm just trying to think what I would say if I were asked the same question. I hate hatchet jobs. I find as I get older, I find them even more annoying because they're not.
I actually agree. Actually, I find. I can say personally, I find myself getting more. I feel kinder as a critic in some ways. If that makes any sense, it sounds very wishy-washy. But as I get older, I find, and that's not about thinking what the filmmaker thinks about what I'm saying. I mean, my duty is not to the filmmaker or what the actor thinks. I think I just feel that it's my job to be more constructive, I think, than maybe I once thought. And that's not to say that I ever delighted in the hatchet job or the rant, but I do feel that, and I equally find myself reacting against reviews which don't feel constructive or which do feel ranty or which are hatchet jobs. I agree.
Yeah, that's just because it doesn't get you anywhere. It's it's just about the personality of the writer and nothing to do with the film. Usually, it's not that fun to read a rant or a hatchet job. It seems they often seem more fun to write than they are to read. Yeah. I mean, they're easy to write, right? It's very. I think it's a very lazy form of writing. It's kind of easy to be beguiled into imagining that it's as entertaining for a reader as it is for you to write. But it really is. So. A hatchet job that has lots of things to say, I happily read. They're hard. It's hard to write a good hatchet job. I wouldn't use the word destroying a movie. And that's something I hate. Critics who have a strong sense of the importance. Going back to let's think of this way so you can edit it. We're talking about personal bugbears about critics. And critics who have an inflated sense of the importance of the film critic, I think that can come across in the writing, and that's a real turn off as well.